In this video, I'm going to take a look at the Carl Zeiss Ultron 50 f1.8. If you spend time online researching the very best fast 50s from the 1960s and 70s, then you're likely to come across this legendary lens from West Germany. It's hailed as one of the great lenses from that era, a lens with a reputation for being exceptionally well made, with excellent resolving power, sharp from wide open, and beautiful color rendering. Indeed, it has been claimed that this lens was the sharpest 50mm standard lens of all, not only when it was first made in 1968, but for the next 20 years or so. As well as its optical performance, the lens has one extraordinary feature, a feature that is extremely appealing to collectors of great lenses. It has a concave front element, i.e. curved inwards, rather than the normal curving outwards, convex shape of the vast majority of other lenses. Despite being hugely tempted to own one of these lenses for its concave glass, I think it's rather sexy, I resisted the temptation for a long time. I spent hours looking at photos taken with the lens posted online, and you can see it's a great performer stopped down. However, I didn't always like the look of how the Ultron rendered out-of-focus areas wide open. It seemed a bit ugly to me, a bit blocky. I love experimenting with wide-open photography on digital cameras, and I'm all for imperfect and eye-catching bokeh, but not the kind of over-defined rendering, which can be a characteristic of some Ultron-design lenses. It's an expensive old lens, justifiably so for its uniqueness. I'm not saying it's not worth the money, but as a user, not a collector, I personally don't want to splash out on a lens I wouldn't enjoy using wide open. Then I had two pieces of good fortune. Firstly, I had the chance to try the Ultron for a morning, borrowing an M42 mount version. And secondly, sometime later, I found an Icarex mount version for an unmissable price. After trying both lenses, I'll discuss what it's like to use the lenses on digital cameras, how they perform, and I'll let you know whether I've changed my mind about the Ultron's wide-open rendering. I'll start with a quick overview of the camera the lens was designed for, the Zeiss Ikon Icarex 35. And then I'll cover the lens's specs. By the way, Ikon or Icon, please excuse any mispronunciations. The camera and lens were actually developed by Voigtländer, but then sold under the Zeiss name after the merger between Zeiss and Voigtländer in 1966. Zeiss released two versions before my camera. All three cameras had an Icarex bayonet mount, a solid way of connecting lenses. Indeed, the whole camera and its controls have a weighty, solid feel. It's an impressive piece of gear, and a handsome-looking camera. Unfortunately, the camera's sales were hampered by its uncommon lens mount, and the limited number and variety of lenses available with the mount. So Zeiss decided to release modified cameras with an M42 mount. You can tell the M42 versions because they have a TM badge. Turning to the Ultron 50 f1.8, it was designed by a team led by A.W. Tronnier, and there's more information online about Tronnier, who has a lot of fans, and about his designs, if you're interested. According to the information online, the lens is a double Gauss planar type, with 7 elements in 6 groups, and it was the first lens that used computational optical design under the Zeiss name. The highly unusual concave front element, according to Tronnier, helped with the dispersion of light and correcting image errors. Whatever its advantages, the concave design didn't seem to catch on, and the next Ultron, the Voigtländer Color Ultron 50 f1.8, not designed by Tronnier, had a different optical design, with a flatter convex front element. Less well known, perhaps, is the great effort put into making the glass elements, choosing appropriate materials for each element, all in an attempt to improve performance and minimize chromatic aberrations. Again, you can read about this online if you'd like to learn more. I found the article referenced on the slide especially interesting and helpful. One issue you'll have if you buy an Icarex mount version is it's quite difficult to find adapters for digital cameras, and costly when compared to M42 adapters. I managed to find one that works perfectly with my Sony E-mount camera with full infinity focus. Another issue involves the uncommon bayonet-style arrangement for attaching filters and hoods at the front. You can't use ordinary screw-on filters and hoods. My lens came with a filter but not a hood. The right hoods are hard to find, and I've had to make do with a 58mm hood slid over the top of the front of the lens. Not very secure, but it does the job okay. Now on to what the lens is like to use on digital cameras, starting with a M42 mount lens I borrowed for a morning. My first reaction to the Ultron was that I love the polished metal focus ring at the front. It looks wonderful, it's very easy to use, it's very tactile. The lens has a clickless aperture ring, which I think is a bonus, and it has large handles on the side, helpful for finding and adjusting the aperture when you're looking through the viewfinder. I spent most of my time with the borrowed lens wide open, because that's what I really wanted to test. When you look through a viewfinder, especially an electronic viewfinder you can magnify, you can tell pretty quickly how sharp a lens is wide open. And with the copy of the lens I borrowed, I wouldn't say I was wowed by its sharpness wide open. Yes, the Ultron was clearly a sharp lens wide open, but it didn't seem to me to be the bitingly sharpest old fast 50 I'd used. That was my initial reaction to what I was seeing. And then the out-of-focus rendering. Well, my time with the lens confirmed what I'd seen online. The wide-open bokeh was not, to me, the most appealing. It actually swirls a little, which is fun, but overall it's too blocky, too contrasty for my tastes. I'll qualify this conclusion in a minute or so, but from my early tests, the bokeh didn't look the best. Ironically, I processed one of the images from the day, hid some of the out-of-focus blur with the dark vignette, and lo and behold, this image turned out to be one of my more successful explores ever on Flickr. Stopped down, the M42 lens performed more in line with its stellar reputation. A really sharp lens with lovely colours, very impressive. And judging from this quickly taken doggy snap, it seemed the Ultron might make an excellent portrait lens. This conclusion about the lens's excellent stop-down performance has been confirmed with my own Icarex mount version. It is a very sharp lens for its time. Excellent if you want to zoom into wider landscape shots, for instance. Or use the lens as a walk-around town lens. I really began to appreciate just how good this lens is when we visited the Queen's Gallery at Buckingham Palace to see a Holbein exhibition. Hans Holbein, in case you didn't know, was a German-Swiss painter to Henry VIII's court in the 16th century. I used the lens in the gallery in pretty dim light to take photos of some of the drawings and paintings in the exhibition. Holbein produced some of the most lifelike images of people, really capturing their look and personalities, and it's been speculated that he might have used a camera obscura or some other optical aid to help complete his drawings. He sometimes used a technique called pouncing to transfer his drawings to a canvas for painting. It involved making small pinpricks in the paper to copy the outline of the face. I wanted to take a photo of these pinpricks. There are some on a drawing of St. Thomas More, the Catholic saint who was beheaded for treason, and I took along a sharp macro lens to get up close and personal. But I didn't need the macro. The Ultron was easily good enough. An amazing result. I'm sure Hans would have been mightily impressed. Being such a sharp performer stopped down, the lens is also good with extension tubes. This happy egg and ancient bling couple are less than 2 centimeters tall. And close-up product shots like these mint balls, not the balls I normally talk about. The Ultron delivers good color contrasts with strong colors, but the strong colors are not unnaturally vivacious. This is a pretty boring composition, but it's a good test of performance, and the details amongst the pedestrians and the colours, the reds and yellows, are really good. And a few more stop-down images to look at. One thing owners talk about is how the lens delivers reasonably strong contrasts, straight out of camera, compared to many other contemporary fast 50s. I said the reds and yellows are good, but the blues seem less accurate. If you look at this image, straight out of camera, again there are excellent details. But the blue colour of the sky has a more purplish tint, a coloration that is noticeable on other images as well. Next, we need to cover flaring. The lens doesn't have advanced multi-coatings, and it's definitely prone to flare. This type of flaring is not exceptionally bad for an old lens. In fact, it can be a creative effect you can exploit if you choose. It's also noted online that the lenses developed for the Icarus camera have a reputation for another kind of flaring on digital cameras, as a result of a lack of coatings on the rear glass elements. This causes light to reflect off the glass back onto the sensor. And here you can see light bouncing off the aperture blades back onto the sensor. Before condemning the Ultron, I should add that this is by no means the only old Fast 50 where you can see this effect. Back to the positives, and you won't be surprised to learn that a lens that produces good colour contrasts also produces excellent results when you convert colour images to black and white. I didn't have to do much processing to this image for it to really pop in monochrome. Here are some more. And one taken wide open. This brings us on to wide open images and the contentious issue of how effectively the Ultron renders out of focus areas. I say contentious because some reviewers really rate the bokeh produced by this lens as a 5-star performer, but there are others, including me at first, who think that the bokeh can be on the ugly side. After using the Ultron for a reasonable length of time, and considering other lenses I've tried, my conclusion now is that the Ultron is not the best bokeh lens overall, but still, it can produce great results. As is so often the case when it comes to wide-open bokeh-rich images, it all depends on the scene you're photographing, and how well you and your gear capture that scene. For example, I absolutely love this image. I love how the lens has rendered the colours and the out-of-focus highlights. And I'll get back to other wide-open images I really like in a moment. But I can also show you images from the Ultron where I really don't like how the lens has rendered a scene wide open. For example, in these images, the lens is producing, in my opinion, blocky, even ugly out-of-focus areas. The wide-open contrasts are too strong. And the lens has a tendency to blow brighter out-of-focus highlights. Take a look at this image with its very strong wide-open contrasts. I haven't boosted the contrasts at all after taking the photo. The reality is that strong contrasts are good for stop-down images, but not so much for wide-open images, where you want more of a sense of subject isolation, a sharp in-focus subject, and a smoother foreground and background. Enough of the bad stuff. Let's get back to images where I think the blur is beautifully handled. First of all, as you'd expect from a Fast 50 with a reasonably close minimum focusing distance, the lens is capable of excellent subject isolation, moving from stop down to wide open. The isolation is good, even with busy foregrounds and backgrounds. And I think the way the lens has rendered the out-of-focus areas in these next two shots is very attractive. This is particularly good, even if the lens's tendency to produce strong contrasts lets it down a little in the top left-hand corner. I especially like the shape of the out-of-focus highlight bubbles produced by the lens. They are lovely and very well rendered. And as we saw with the M42 version, there's more than a hint of swirl in some images too. Looking at wide-open images against bright light, chromatic aberrations are pretty well controlled. There is a little fringing, but it's not a big deal. Stop down, apart from the flare you can see here, the lens behaves very well. This was taken directly into the sun. Despite my positive comments, I'm still not convinced this is the best bokeh lens. To demonstrate this, let's compare the blur produced by the Ultron with the blur from another f1.8 lens, a lens with a stellar reputation for its beautifully rendered bokeh, the Carl Zeiss Pan Color radioactive version. I use this scene for comparison, and also use the camera's auto exposure settings. And this is what its blur looks like from the Ultron when I move the lens to its minimum focusing distance. Not bad, you might think. It's reasonably smoothed out. And here is the same scene with the pan color. You'll immediately notice the impact of the yellowing from the radioactive glass. Side by side for the blurred images, and leaving aside the different coloration, you'll see quite a striking difference in the rendering of the blur, and I personally much prefer the pan color result. The pan color is softer and dreamier. But, hold on, the eagle-eyed aficionados amongst you will know I'm playing a bit of a trick with these images, because I'm not actually comparing like for like. The pan color has a shorter minimum focusing distance. It's 0.35 meters compared to the Ultron's 0.45 meters, and this gives the edge to the pan color in terms of producing a blurrier result. So let's get a level playing field and show comparable images, both taken with the lenses set at 0.45 meters. It's harder to tell the differences, and the yellowing doesn't help comparisons, but I still prefer the pan color's softer rendering of out-of-focus areas. In terms of sharpness wide open, having tested the Ikon mount lens, I'm going to stick with my findings from the M42 version, namely that the Ultron is a nice and sharp lens wide open, but it's not the sharpest old fast 50 I've tried. Here are a few examples of how the lens performs close up wide open, where I've nailed the focus. This performance is nothing to be sneezed at. However, some other lenses I've tried are sharper, and you're going to ask me what lenses they are. Well, I'm going to give you just one example, and that's this Schneider Xenon f1.8. Looking through the viewfinder of my mirrorless camera, I can definitely see a difference in sharpness wide open between the Xenon and the Ultron. I can show you what I mean with this setup again. Here are the wide open shots taken with the Ultron and the Xenon, focusing on the clock face at the center. I'm confident that both these images are as sharp as I can make them on the clock. I'll crop right into the clock. Zooming into each image in turn, you can see the details, starting with the Ultron. Now the Xenon, and I hope you can tell the Xenon has sharper details, sharper rendering wide open. So in this test, the Xenon is certainly sharper wide open than the Ultron. And both the Xenon and Ultron are sharper than my pan color, which I know has a good reputation for wide open sharpness with some owners. One other point to make about the Ultron's mechanical design, and that's the small number of aperture blades it has. Conventionally, many people want their high-quality lenses to have more than 5 blades, so they can stop down somewhat and still see nice round out-of-focus highlights. The Ultron has been criticized for only having 5 blades, adding to negative comments on the bokeh. My view, for what it's worth, is that I rather like the out-of-focus stop-down highlights produced by the lens. I think they have quite a strong retro look and are quite appealing. And the geometric shapes have slightly rounded edges rather than straight edges, helping to add to the appeal. Finally, the use of the Ultron as a portrait lens. As I mentioned before, when I borrowed the lens, it seemed like it might make an excellent lens for portraits, and it does. Wide open, it produces sharp, but not embarrassingly sharp images, with an attractive depth of field for a 3D style pop. And I really enjoyed using the lens's tendency to blow out bright background highlights in the right conditions. If you control exposure levels without blowing out too much of the image, it gives subjects a lovely glow and higher key background blur. The only caveat is that if you stop down too much, you have to be careful not to swamp your subject with distracting background details. The lens loves those details. So that's my review of the mighty Carl Zeiss Ultron 50 f1.8. Everything they said about it online is true. Having tried 2 copies, I've been very impressed with the results, with a couple of caveats. It's not the sharpest old fast 50 wide open I've used, but wide open sharpness isn't everything, and it's easily sharp enough. And there are better bokeh lenses with more character. The Ultron can produce ugly bokeh on occasions, but then so can some other famous lenses with different optical designs. And the bokeh can be lovely in the right conditions. You just need to learn the lens's strengths and avoid its weaknesses wide open, like all lenses really. Stopped down, the Ultron is one of the best 50-year-old fast 50s I've tried. It's extremely sharp compared to most of its contemporaries. Really sharp if you pixel peep details zooming in. And it's not handicapped, as some other sharp old lenses are, by poor contrasts or muted colours. So not only does the Ultron look very cool with its concave front element, it performs very well overall for its age. One other point I'd like to make, and that's the Ultron has taught me a big lesson. I was wrong to doubt it simply because of my over-obsession with wide-open bokeh. It's a very special old lens, indeed a great lens. It's a lens anyone will be lucky to own and use, but ultimately, given its market price, I think it's primarily a collector's lens, especially for its unique concave front element. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Please comment below. All comments are most appreciated. Please also subscribe if you haven't already done so. And watch out for a future video where I'll be showing you a lens that costs a lot less than the Carl Zeiss Ultron, but performs in a reasonably similar way. So until the next time, all the best.